lastly, we have Mihael. Just sit.
Thanks.
And put that in your...
Okay. Let me just. Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, Mihael will talk about how to manage technical debt. So, yeah.
Thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Mihael and I've been part of Infinum's Android team for 2.5 years. So the goal of today's presentation is to talk about strategies for managing technical debt. In this presentation, I'll try to cover three different chapters. The first one is introduction, in which I will talk about the definition of technical debt. I'll go to some of the common issues and I'll define the types. After that, I'll go through the common strategies for managing technical debt, and then at the end I'm going to talk about prevention. So according to SonarSource, technical debt is future cost of rework you will need through a later point in time within software development because priority was placed on speed, quick fix patches, or releases instead of complete or finished code. Yeah, that's quite a long definition, but the main point is if you don't do something the right way immediately, you will probably have to pay for it later. So now let's go through the causes. I haven't listed all of them because there's really a lot of them, but I've tried to point out those that I find the most important. So the first one is favoring features over stability for too long. Now, I don't think that there's anything wrong with focusing on features for a short period of time, but if you're going to do that long term, then that could lead to some issues with unsustainability. Another one is lack of definition. For this, I would say that oftentimes we have some refinement for certain features and we don't refine things well enough, either in architecture or in design, and then that could cause differences, especially if we have a project that has multiple platforms. A good example of that would be if you have an app which allows remote coffee brewing and you support two platforms, and if you have some pre-checks that you need to do before you send the brew command, then differences between those pre-checks on both platforms might not result in different things at the beginning, but if you continue to add new features related to brewing, then you could have some issues later on. Another cause is lack of technical knowledge, and this is from the client's perspective. Now, keep in mind that I'm speaking about all of this from a point of a developer who works for an agency and not a product-based company. So it's not actually the client's fault that they don't have the technical knowledge, but it's the developer's responsibility that they elaborate things to the client well enough, and then the client can understand things and make a better decision. A good example of that would be if you are going to raise a minimum SDK on one of the apps, then you would need to elaborate that to the client and not just say that we need to raise minimum SDK. Otherwise, the client will only get to the point that they will lose some users who have older phones. Another cause is a lack of experience or knowledge, but this is from the developer side. So let's say that you have a really complex feature and you are not sure how to implement it. Then you go to the documentation, you find ways to finish it up, and yay, the feature works, all acceptance criteria is met. But if you were a bit of a, if there was a more experienced developer working on this, then they could have perhaps utilized their knowledge in design patterns, which would allow them to create a solution which is much more maintainable and easier to test. Another one is poor standards. Well, easy way to identify that is if you don't have a unified coding style, if you're lacking some automated processes, or you don't have enough documentation, or there's a lot of high coupling inside of your project. And another one is last-minute changes. Well, oftentimes, I mean, not often, but sometimes it happens that we want the client or someone from the team suggests an improvement, and we try to add something to the feature that's practically already developed. And what happens here is we tend to rush things because we don't have enough time, or the suggestion which was presented wasn't defined enough, and then we can also have some issues because of that. And the last one is time. I mean, sadly we cannot battle against that, but if we don't maintain the code, then definitely parts of it will age poorly. Now let's go through some of the types of technical debt. So the first one is intentional. This one occurs when you're focusing on delivering a certain feature instead of maintaining the certain level of stability at the same time. And there's nothing wrong with that, but if that happens, then it's the responsibility of the development team to actually define and track those things and fix them after the initial stage of the development is done. To give an example for that, let's say there was a pandemic, and there is an agency who works on a video conferencing service, and they had a hint that a pandemic would be declared and people would start working remotely. Now, in that case, their focus was to finish the project as soon as possible and release it, just because they wanted to be one of the pioneers with that solution on the market. Otherwise, a different company with a similar product would get the bigger part of the cake. Another one is unintentional. Well, that one happens when a certain feature is either complex, we don't fully understand it, or we didn't have enough time, so we rushed for solutions, and which resulted in poor code, or we didn't have enough time to test things out. Another one is environmental. Well, for this one I would say that the best example is when there is no active development for a certain period of time, and yeah, then that's when the technical debt occurs. Now I would like to shortly discuss about responsibility. This is also from a context of an agency. Usually at Infinum the most common setup contains these three entities. We have developer, project manager, and at the end we have the client or product owner. And each of these is responsible for keeping the ball rolling if you want to do something. So if a developer wants to tackle a certain technical debt, make an improvement, they would contact the project manager, try to explain it to them in an understandable way. Then the project manager would need to further elaborate that to the client so that they also understand it. But just a disclaimer here, every one of those could drop the ball, and we wouldn't progress with to the other entity. So if the developer fails to communicate the issue well enough to the project manager, then project manager will never notify the client. But if the project manager fails to elaborate things to the client, then the same thing will happen. Now, why is any of this actually important? Well, there are a couple of reasons. The first one is losing customers. If you have a big enough technical debt, you will probably have some older code which will have some issues that will result in bugs. And yeah, people don't like bugs, so some of them might leave the app, uninstall it. Another one is increased development costs. Well, as you keep paying it off away, the more the total amount of which you will have to pay will be increased at the end. So it's better to tackle technical debt as soon as possible. Another one is decreased developer productivity. Well, developers will spend less time focusing on developing features, and they will be more focused on handling technical debt. Why is that? Because when you are developing a feature and you have bad solutions which you have to work with, then that will expand your period for developing a new feature. And as you can see the graph on the left, it shows that you will have less time, and yeah, you will struggle more with complexity as the debt increases. And another one is increased security risks. Well, if we don't update parts of the app that are security sensitive, then sensitive data could get stolen, then you could again lose your users, reputation, and that could lead to financial problems. And then at the end we have increased number of bugs. Well, if we don't maintain parts of code, and let's say a new version of Android comes up and Google decides to add some certain rules for push notifications or something. If we don't handle that case, then the behavior could be undefined, and again we will have a lot of bugs. Okay, so now I'd like to go through some of the common strategies for managing technical debt. I've talked with a couple of people here, and I quoted their strategies. So once I read one of those, I would like from you to jump in and say if you think that the strategy is okay or if something could be improved. So the first strategy, I called it should I do this? It says, whenever there's a dependency that needs an update or a part of the app that has become too complex to maintain, I always ask the project manager if it's okay for me to work on those things, no matter the required effort. Do you have any opinions on that? Is this good enough?
It does cover the part about the open communication, about the requirements of focusing on it, but it's probably not perfect. Because it's always good to at least have a broad estimate of the work needed there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you think that if we try to sneak in things, they might not be tested also? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also hard for the project manager to just decide whether it's okay to work on that or not. Project managers usually don't have that kind of information, and they need to know how much effort does it take and what is the impact of either decision, doing it or not doing it.
Yeah. I agree with you. Anyone else?
I think this works from the developer perspective, but not from the product perspective.
Okay. So yeah, I would say that this works well for low effort changes, and I would just like to say that from developer perspective, it's not always necessary to ask the project manager for a certain thing, especially if it won't impact your delivery on a certain feature. And also you should include the time required for testing, so keep in mind that you need to test that and someone needs to test that. So if you have a budget or something planned out, try to see if it can fit into that. If not, I wouldn't put it in. Another strategy is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So it says, I'm primarily focused on writing code and shipping features, so I don't worry about technical debt. As long as the product functions and it meets the requirements, I'm pleased. At the end of the day, we can fix the issue once it occurs. That's a bold one.
It works for pump and dump projects. You should.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that one. Anyone else? No? Okay. So yeah, I would say that it's good for short-term and temporary projects. If you're working on an app, let's say for a fair, then it's not really necessary to over-engineer things. Another one is if an app which you decided to develop for someone is a simple app, and it was strictly defined that there will be no scaling later on, and that's like what you're going with, then I wouldn't make things over-engineered. If that happens, then I would put things back to the drawing board and try to define a plan to move forward. And another one is mix. So whenever I have some time left from tasks, I analyze the project and see what can be improved. I apply smaller improvements immediately, and if something requires a bigger effort, I elaborate it in the task and notify the client. Do you see any issues with this one? Or is it good?
It can be hard to explain to the client that they need to pay for something they didn't order. It usually is better to do that, to make sure that they understand that this needs to be done first.
Mm-hmm.
But for other things, sure, housekeeping on the go is good.
Yeah. Anyone else? No. Okay. So yeah. I would say that this is good for long-term projects because this way you're focusing also on technical debt, and technical debt is more important on long-term projects than on the shorter ones. And yeah, if we are going to look at this from an agency standpoint, notice the word improvements here. If there is something you can improve on the project and it's not necessarily related to technical debt, and it's a bigger priority, then I think it's better to tackle that instead of the debt. And a good example of that would be adding a dark theme to an app, which could make users happier, it could make the client happier, and yeah, from an agency standpoint, that's a way to go. And yeah, that's it, I mentioned that here. So let's just recap what are the things to consider when we are talking about different strategies. The first one is project complexity. We shouldn't use the same approach when we are working on a complex project or a simpler one. Another one is improvements with more value. If there is something that can be improved, which can bring better value, both to the client and to you as developers, then you should perhaps focus on that one. Another one is effort to make things right. Always try to estimate things as accurate as possible, because if you're going to add something and you ask for your time and you go over the estimate, the client won't be happy. And the last one is project length. So if you are working on a project that has a longer life cycle, then there's more need to tackle technical debt and focus on it. And now let's just talk shortly about prevention. So how do we prevent technical debt? Well, we can't, but we can manage it. And how do we do that? Well, for starters, we can use static analysis tools and CI/CD tools. For static analysis, speaking from Android's world, I would say we can use lint, detect, sonar also. And for CI/CD at Infinum, we usually use Bitrise. Another one is updating tools and dependencies regularly. That's the way to go if you want to fight the time as from the standpoint of technical debt. And another one is organizing discussions about technical debt on a monthly basis. So I think it's good enough to have a discussion at least once a month. It can be more frequent, but the goal of these, in my opinion, would be to start the ball rolling. And if you have one meeting when you haven't done anything, and second one, and you come to the third one, someone's going to say, what are we doing? We have to start making things, and fixing technical debt. So it's kind of good to have a reminder. Another one is track technical debt and solve it continuously. So for this one, I would say that it's not good to let it build up. And if you have more than 100 to-dos in your project, then I think it's much better to actually use some other system than inside of the project, create some kind of board, set priorities, give ballpark estimates if you can, and so on. And the last one is communicate business value of reducing technical debt to the client. For every technical debt, for most, there is a business value which you can communicate, and the client might not understand technical aspects, but they do understand business. So at the end, we talked about responsibility. How do we get the ball rolling? Well, for starters, I think it's important to emphasize current issues and growth rate. So if you have developed a certain feature and you want to tackle some technical debt, you can always say to the client, you can go back to the estimates and tell them how different the estimates would have been if you fixed some things before that. And another one would be to mention that, give a good example. For example, at the beginning of a project, when you set up things, let's say you have mobile app with screens. For first screen, it took you 20 hours to make it. For the second one, it took you 8. Why? Because you set some things up. Similar thing with this. Another one is create tasks with the main focus being on a business value. Why is that? Well, a business value is something that the client will mostly understand, and it's not only the client that you need to persuade to tackle technical debt, but you also need to persuade your project manager beforehand. Another one is separating tasks into as many independent logical units as possible. Well, why? Because that will not only make the board look more structured, it will be more clear what you need to tackle. You will have more tasks, which, might seem overwhelming, but you can say it like this. We don't have to tackle everything all at once. We can tackle it chunk by chunk, as it is separated independently. And in that way, the client won't be overwhelmed by the total amount of hours needed for a certain refactor or something else. And yeah, also to draw a comparison, if you're watching a YouTube video, you will probably watch a couple of shorter ones, then watch one that's longer. So to point out again, estimations are the key. I think it's better to give as precise estimate as possible. If you go a bit over that, I mean, if you break the estimate, then the client and the project manager won't be as happy to give you time to focus on other improvement tasks, just because they might assume that you will also break estimates on those. But also, if you overestimate, then they might not be as happy to prioritize that. Another way to get the ball rolling is setting boundaries to what to fix and what not to fix. This is just because, well, we can't fix everything. Technical debt cannot be fully solved. And the last one is, if you manage to solve some things in the technical debt, you release something, always do a proper follow-up. Technical debt is not solved when you merge that last PR, but it's actually solved after you make that release and you make sure that everything's going okay, that there are no crashes, errors or something similar. And yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, I have two questions. So first one is estimations. How do you approach those? Because it's hard. For me, I often underestimate the time when we. So how do you do that? Like by lines of code, or is there any other approach?
We had a workshop at Infinum about this, and even after the workshop, I'm sad to say, but I'm still not sure how to give good estimates. But a good guideline would be to always, if you have someone else who worked either on the same project or works on a project or part of the app that's kind of similar logically, I think it's good to sync with other people and get their opinions. So either you can, for example, for an Android app, you could ask someone what's the minimum amount of hours you would estimate for a screen, like the simplest one, which could then give you some number to play with. And another one, which I often did, is if there's a kind of a whole feature, I would usually check my estimations with someone who's a bit more senior or someone who's from a different platform, especially if you're doing estimations for both.
And the second question, maybe a little bit provocative. Do you think AI would be good with technical debt, and did you try any tools?
I would say that we had one technical debt on one project where we had an issue with carousel. It's a simple thing, but the client wanted that the carousel has different heights, and the content could be of any size. And on Android, that's not easy to implement without introducing some performance issues. And on iOS, they just set one fill max height, and that's it. On Android, I tried a couple of things. I tried using a lot of AI tools to help me, try to solve that around, and nothing helped, which resulted in a bit of a different implementation on our end, which created the technical debt. So in this case, it didn't help me. But using AI I believe it can speed up a lot of things. So if speeding up things leaves you more time from the estimations in which you can improve some things and again make the client even happier, then yeah, it could be used to fix technical debt, manage.
As Luca previously mentioned, it would probably solve around 13% of technical debt issues. So.
Yeah, honestly, I spent 2 weeks trying to fix that carousel. Anyone else? Yeah.
I also have two questions. One of them is a philosophical one, and the second is provocative. Have you heard about Basecamp? You know about the company called Basecamp?
I think I heard about it, yeah.
Okay, so they're currently launching a series of products called Once, and their idea is to build a product, push it out, and that's it. They don't plan to maintain it, they don't plan to upgrade, they just plan to resolve like critical errors, and that's it. You know,
Mhm.
build it once, ship it out, and that's it. And DHH basically said that he doesn't give a fuck about technical debt,
Mhm.
because he's working in Ruby, and Ruby does not have technical debt.
Good, good.
What do you feel about, like, what's your opinion about those type of products? Like in 5 years or 10 years, like, do you feel that they will still be usable, or that the technical debt that is accumulated or that will happen during the time will ultimately, in the end, will result that those products will fail?
I mean, it's that's a philosophical one, right?
Yeah.
I think that that really depends on the type of project. As you said, Ruby is kind of a bit harder to break, but I think that for every other type of platform, it will take different time for the technical debt to build up until that breaking point. For Ruby, it might be 100 years, it could be 10 years, we don't know. I would draw a comparison to Android and iOS. I think it was 2019 when Apple introduced the Swift UI. Nobody even talked about it before. And suddenly everything's technical debt and you have to move towards it. So there's no guarantee that you aren't creating technical debt.
It's actually a really good point, because this perfectly leads to the second question, which is more provocative one. Do you feel that Android as a platform, as a framework, as OS, is more prone to technical debt than some other platforms? So specifically, like, I'm not sure if you know about it, but I also worked as an Android developer. So
I'm aware of it, yeah.
If they got trimmed down the memory lane. So 10 years ago, we were using dot activities, threads, and async tasks. Then we said, okay, this is shit. Then we moved to MVP. Then we said, okay, this is crap. Then we moved to MVVM. Okay, we said, this is crap. Then we moved to RX. Then we moved to coroutines. Like a bunch of stuff has happened in the last 10 years. And probably from perspective of a new developer, if you saw the Android code that we did like 5 years ago, he would have said, this has accumulated a lot of technical debt.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Some platforms are more prone to that, or specific Android.
Well, I could say that for Android and for iOS, I see some technical debt just because of the latest political things that were happening, where European Union is trying to, enforce its laws, which makes them, change things in their code. And if you don't do that, then you have some technical debt. But other than that, for frameworks, I don't have a good enough comparison. I've tried to think about it, but I would say it's might not be the best example, but it's like for a human being. If you want to keep the product alive, if you want to keep yourself alive, then there are different stages. At one point, someone starts going to the gym, starts training, then you take more proteins and so on. Then at the end, you have some different priorities, and then you start working. You want to earn more money. The object changes, and with products, we have features, and every feature actually has a certain goal, let's say. And if you try to, as you get older, you will need to spend more money on your medicine and so on. So I think it's the same thing as with humans. The same thing is with the product's life cycle. There will always be technical debt, and I think that Android and iOS are really good examples of that, but I'm not as experienced on other platforms, so I cannot 100% say that others aren't. Yeah, no problem. Answering the provocative question with a philosophical answer. Anyone else?
Yeah, in the last slide you said that you have to monitor your refactors or your solutions to technical debt. So let's say you have a tough client and you convince them that there's a huge part of Java that needs to be refactored, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not so easy to convince them, and they finally allow you to spend some of the budget to improve the code base. And then after you did that refactor, starts apps to produce new bugs that weren't happening before due to your refactor. And client gets angry because that's something they didn't want to do in the first place. You convinced me to do this, and there are new bugs coming. How to prevent it?
How to prevent bugs? Well, that's up to every developer and the peer reviewer. But that's the reason. I know that you cannot refactor everything let's say on one branch and then push it all in a single release. But if we were to apply concepts of trunk-based development and have more frequent releases, then we could, spot the issue beforehand. And if it's a small change, then you could just revert it and try to fix it later on. So I don't think it's easy to fix that, depending on the refactor you're trying to do.
Yeah, I was thinking more in the direction of would you, for that specific reason, organize some maybe bigger regression testing or some kind of in-place process to ensure client is going to be fine. Stuff like that.
I mean, I would definitely have detailed testing whenever you are doing a certain refactor. I would first look at the budget that we have and then try to, as I look at the screens and give them estimates. After that, I would definitely sync with the QA part and see what they say about this and what time they would need to test it out. Because as I mentioned a couple of slides before, if you see a small improvement that you want to make, but you haven't included the time needed for testing, then it's not good. Yeah.
I mean, I was expecting Brandon was fishing for testing to begin with, but to be honest, from experience, I know as a mobile developer, I did write a lot of tests. So testing was like, if I have the time for it, I'll write the test.
Mm-hmm.
But having worked on a project for a long time that has extensive testing suite, you can do refactors quite freely if you have a good enough test suite in your application. You don't have to be that afraid. If you don't have it, you will panic and you will never refactor. Basically, especially in a complex app that's, let's say, it's been alive for 8 years. That's the situation I'm in right now, like 8 or 10 years old app, zero tested in the application. Nobody knows what it's supposed to work with. Like, I'm not refactoring a single thing. But the other app where we had like a 70-80% test coverage, really refactored every single day. There was a need for that. And tech debt was eliminated as a part of the process. So, I mean, test-driven development is like a very old idea that's been around for decades, but if you have the budget and the skill set for it, then go for it. Even on mobile.
I would just like to say that I have here presenter notes, and that was included in the last slide, but I decided not to read them, and I missed that one. But yeah, also you need to do some testing, and the thing that you mentioned, I think that a good strategy, if you are refactoring things, let's say you're moving things from one architecture to a different one, you can write up tests before refactoring. And then just, after you write it, check that every test does what it did before. So, I mean, but that's a concrete example. I didn't go as into detail. But yeah, I agree with you. Anyone else? I smell the pizzas.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.